It's John Bowden from Rock History Music. With Phil Lesh passing away yesterday, we thought we would rebroadcast an interview we did with an author who's a big Deadhead, a big Grateful Dead fan, Ray Robertson. He wrote a book about the 50 best Grateful Dead shows. That's a tall task considering how many Grateful Dead shows there were. More as we tip our hat to late great bassist vocalist Phil Lesh on Rock History Music. The Grateful Dead, the godfathers of the jam bands. Formed in 1965 in the San Francisco area, they were originally called the Warlocks. As the Grateful Dead, they became a legendary rock band known for its eclectic style, blending rock, folk, country, and jazz. And within no time, they were the talk of Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco. The classic lineup included Jerry Garcia on guitar and vocals, Bob Weir, rhythm guitar and vocals, Phil Lesh, bass and vocals, Bill Kreutzmann on drums, and Mickey Hart on drums. Let's not forget Ron Pigpen McKernan on keyboards, vocals. Other notable members included Keith and Donna Godchow, Brent Midland, and Vince Welnick, and at times Bruce Hornsby. In the beginning, their albums didn't really sell that well, but they toured coast to coast. They played the Monterey Pop Festival and Woodstock. Some of their famous albums include American Beauty, their first to go gold in 1970, and Working Man's Dead the same year. We've lost a few, that's for sure. Jerry Garcia died in 95, Ron McKernan in 73, Keith Godchow in 1980, Brent Midland in 1990, Vince Welnick in 2006, and Phil Lesh in 2024. And their popularity? Well, they're doing okay as far as the public eye. At number 10 on Spotify, Scarlet Begonias at 45 million. Shakedown Street at 42 million, Box of Rain at 40, Fire on the Mountain at 36, Truckin' 59 million, Casey Jones at 95, Ripple at 78 million, Touch of Grey, their only real hit single, at 69, and Friend of the Devil at 111 million listens. Specifically about the book, we'll save that for a second. How does someone, and I guess it happens all the time, become a Grateful Dead fan in their late 40s?
Right. Well, as I kind of write about in the essay after the book, the Dead had been there my whole life. I mean, I'd been introduced to them when I was young, and there's just always something kind of more than musical about them that was a little off-putting. It was almost like a cult, you know. It seemed a bit, and my taste ran toward more, I guess you'd call it country rock, alternative country, or whatever, blues rock. And so, of course, I, crossed paths with them. But then in my mid-40s, I started listening to a little more jazz, as one does when one gets a little older. And it was the first time I'd really listened to a musician as opposed to waiting for them to be done playing so I could hear the words again. So I listened to like Grant Green and even some rock people like Richard Thompson or Duane Allman. And I was listening to, it wasn't the Dead, it was a Jerry Garcia solo record, live at the Keystone. And I was sitting in my chair and headphones on, had a glass of wine. And I had never really, I'd heard people talk about, like, Garcia talked about how Coltrane spoke in paragraphs. That was just sort of beyond me because I'm not a musician. I mean, music's a big part of my life. But I was listening to it and I was thinking, I have to hear everything this guy played, his guitar. I have to hear, there was just so many different voices in his guitar. It was jubilant, it was sad, it was sorrowful, it was exploratory. I was just fascinated. And also, you get in your mid-40s, just doors start to close a lot. Well, this was a door opening. I've got a whole world here. And because of that, now I am an even bigger jazz fan because of Garcia, which I think is one of the testaments to a real musician. That you're not just, here are my songs, do you like them? It's more like, do they open up your mind to new experiences and new ways of looking at the world? And I think that Garcia and the Dead's music is it's not just good tunes. It's a different way of looking at the world. So to me, it was a real kind of falling down a rabbit hole. And as a writer, to get it out of your head, you kind of have to write a book about it. So that's what I did. I kind of went full steam into the Dead, and that's why I ended up writing the book, which you didn't ask me, but that's kind of how it happened.
The liner notes thing for the box sets that came before the book, obviously.
Kind of simultaneous. What happened was Dave Lemieux, who's the legacy manager for the Grateful Dead, he read my last book, which came out last year, called Estate Large and Small, which happens to have, believe it or not, a guy who becomes obsessed with Jerry Garcia and smokes too much dope and, blah, blah. He's actually a secondhand bookseller. His bookstore goes out of business because of rising rents in Toronto and blah, blah, blah. So I sent it to him just really out of appreciation for all the work that he did, and he actually liked the book, and so we started corresponding. And I was working on this book, and we seemed to get along. We had a lot of similarities. We kind of came into our first exposure to Dead was similar. And he asked me one day if I wanted to do Days Picks 45. Of course, I was thrilled, not just because I'm a subscriber, so it was kind of like the fan gets to go backstage, but it was a great opportunity to promote my book, you know. So in the liner, the little notes at the end, I said, Ray Robertson's book coming out next year. And then later on, several months later, he said, you want to write 10,000 words for the big 15 CD or 18 CD box set, the summer of 73, the Here Comes Sunshine box set, which was great. So actually the two were simultaneous. So it did feel kind of synchronistic. Like I'm working on this book and here I'm working with the Dead. So it's been kind of nice. Usually when you're pimping a literary book, you're speaking to the 7 people in Canada and the United States who care about such things. But this time it's actually, talking to people like you, because of that connection. So yeah, it's been kind of an interesting experience working on this book and then working on the Dead stuff. It's kind of, it's been a very Dead centric year. Yeah.
You know, I got to share something with you. You'd mentioned about the Canada thing. Being a Canadian, everything I've ever done outside of working for Bell Media, which was been 30 years now, outside of that, almost like the internet radio station I had, all US. Yeah. The jazz station I had before, all US. Yeah. Rocky Stream Music, this channel, because this is going on the big channel, almost all US. Canadians, maybe 5%, UK, pretty high. But that's where the audience is, and there's more of a fervor for this.
Yeah, my wife and I lived in the States for 4 years, and we were in graduate school, and I tried to explain to people that the population of Canada is less than the state of California. So it's not like, oh, we're not as cool. It's just the same proportion of people who get it, who are into music and writing and stuff, are just a smaller percentage. So I'm really lucky with my publisher, Biblioasis, who is located in Windsor, near the American border, and he was very far-reaching. He felt this way years ago. He said, our proportion of our sales was so this. I say the last couple books, I probably sell 65% in the States, 35% here, and I assume with this book it'll be even more because there's just more people that way, which is fine. I mean, as artists or musicians, you don't think about well, you bought my book. What's your nationality? It's more like you just want to spread that good stuff, right? And so I've really kind of embraced that and really so I think that's a great part of it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that because it's still it's a Canadian book and it's written by a Canadian perspective, lots of Canadian references, but the art is universal, right? And that's the beauty of it. Jerry Garcia doesn't have to be alive for us to have our lives changed or be moved. And that's the real stuff. That's what I'm interested in,
So they're not a hippie band to you?
No, they're neo Beatniks.
Damn you, John Bowden.
No, they inspired the hippie. Yeah, I mean, you'll see a little tie-dye or stuff, but Garcia, who really was the conscience of the band, he and Phil Lesh, they really come out of the Beatnik tradition, late 50s, early 60s. That was their formative times. I mean, when the hippies are happening, they're already living their life. In fact, one of the first things they did during the big summer of love was get out of San Francisco and move to Marin County. Just, because there was too many people just showing up off a bus going, hey, where's the free love and free food? And, it was just, there was a great amount of freedom, but there also was that sort of socioeconomic thing. So for me, I mean, there's just certain dovetailing, certain morality, but I really think the Beatnik idea is more on the ball in the sense of Garcia, to me, in his music is ceaselessly questioning. It's always, he said somewhere that he's not interested in declarative sentences, he's interested in question marks, which I think is wonderfully antithetical to the period we live in, where you have to have an instant opinion on one, are you left or you right? Are you this or you that? And he's like, let's circle around these topics and let's explore the nuances and stuff. So that's what I think. It's not so much a bunch of set beliefs. The Beatnik ideas, of course, is that the way I put it in the book is that hippies want to change the world. Beatniks want the world just to go away. So I think I'm more sympathetic to that.
When, at what point did you become, at least in your mind, a writer? When did you know?
Right. Well, yeah, that's a good question because there's two different ways. Looking back on it, it was probably when my friend Jim and I in public school would imitate other teachers' voices and our friends' voices, and we had a little notebook. We'd write down little funny not anything more than sayings or things. But when I went to university, grew up in a small town called Chatham, Ontario, near the American border, and I went off to U of T and studied philosophy. And I eventually sort of lost interest, kind of similar reason we're talking about, sort of these absolutes, you know. And I just found it, and I met my wife, my then girlfriend, she was a painter. She was a painter. And she sort of kind of opened my eyes to maybe there's more to this. So it was quite audacious, decided to me at age 26 or whatever, oh, now I want to write novels. I encountered a bunch of people who meant a lot to me, Carson McCullers, Thomas McWayne, Barry Hanna, Kerouac, of course. But I never thought, because my whole idea was to go to school, get a PhD, go off and teach. And it was around that period, I think that was when I realized that I really didn't play well with others. I really like being alone. I like a good day to me is if I can make a paragraph work. Now, good work if you can get it. So it's been a long, strange trip to get to there. But yeah, so 15 books later, I guess I'm a writer. But I think it really comes down to just basically the best reason to do anything, pleasure. I just really enjoy coming up with, you know, oh, I'll write this book about the dead. And the way it changes, you know, at first it was 100 shows, and then it was this, and then it became this. How are we going to, it's not 50 greatest hits of the Grateful Dead. It tells a story. So which shows should I use from what period? And that kind of keeps me pretty occupied.
How'd you do that, by the way? That was my next question. How did you pick the shows?
Yeah, well, obviously you pick shows that you're familiar with or you've heard of. But for me, there were a lot more shows picked initially because, again, I think it's possible to pick up this book and go, oh, I love Europe 72, so I'm going to flip through and read those shows. But also I think there is a story. There's not just the story of the music, which is really what this book is about. It's not a faux biography, although there's a biographical narrative to it. But it's really about how the music changed, how they are an R&B based, like a Stonesy cover band with Pigpen singing. He's the lead guy, and then they change and they become this. They become these jazz thing, and then they become arena rock. But over the course of that, and this is one of the reasons I like writing as well, I don't know beforehand what's going to happen in a novel. And I didn't know what was going to happen in this book. But when I was writing the book, I really realized that this was a story about American success, too, North American success, in the sense that, well, we all know about Garcia's, you know, heroin addiction and health problems stuff. And I think when I was writing the book, it became clear to me that, and this goes back to your question, you needed to select shows that made this work. I think essentially he became a victim of his own success, and the Dead became a victim of their own success. That ideally, you're not playing in a football stadium. You know, the epigraph to the shows is from Bob Weir, a show from February 13th, 1970, before the show begins, because they're playing in front of people who look like them, hang out with them. Maybe it's 1,800 people. And he says, this ain't a show, it's a party. And for a long time it was, you know, even, and when the Dead try, when they start getting near that age 30 and they all have kids and mortgages and stuff, how can we keep this being fun? Which was Garcia's mantra, capital F fun, and yet be grown-ups. And they really did try. Like when they shut things down for 18 months, the height of their popularity, who else does that? We're getting too popular, let's stop playing for a while. Set up their own record company, all that kind of stuff. And most of it fails, but it was this attempt. And eventually by late 70s, the attempt is gone. You become subsumed by the mainstream, you become subsumed by what we know today as the rock industry. And it's kind of hard to remove yourself. It's kind of hard to become less popular and that kind of thing. And I think basically Garcia accepted the road of less resistance. And I think that's why he self-medicated to a great degree, was that he didn't want to be playing in front of 65,000 people, the same songs over and over again, and putting on a crappy show and having people applaud and go crazy. You know, he hated the idea of celebrity as a talent, you know, and he felt that they had become, you know, an icon of a nostalgia, you know, a nostalgia pull. And I think that really, I think some of the best music he played was with his solo band and playing bluegrass with David Grisman and all sorts of music like that, not in the big stadium show. So when I picked the shows, I wanted to sort of have that sense of liftoff, because it really, to me, is remarkable how they progressed. Because these guys, Phil Lesh didn't play the bass when he joined the band. You know, Garcia said
he was a classical musician, wasn't he?
Yeah, he's a classical musician guy. He studied jazz, or studied classical at university, dropped out. He's worked at the post office, taking a lot of speed, listening. And he wasn't a rock and roll guy, but he was a post office guy. And he had a radio in his car. And he said, wow, radio's changed. Can you know, you're a radio guy. Can you imagine in 1966, turning on AM radio, you hear the Supremes, you hear James Brown, you hear Cream, you hear the Beatles.
Everything.
You hear you're everything. It's just, if it's good, it's on the radio. See, this other stuff, see, that's not all, kid stuff. And I love that idea. It doesn't matter you don't know how to play the bass. I'll teach you on the weekend. The point is you get it. And I love that. But then I think, and this is where I think I'm going to come up with some problems with some Deadheads, is I don't believe the music got better and better and better and better. Let's buy everything and celebrate. It's all good. Don't be a hater. No, I think the music changes, and I don't think it changes for the better. And I think that's one of the advantages of just listening to the shows, not having, I have friends who went to so many shows in the 90s, and I talk about this in the book, and it changed their lives. But it wasn't the music, it was the scene. And that's great. It's the age of Reagan, and it's great. The 80s, and they go, and they felt this acceptance, and it was wonderful. But I don't think we're going to, there's a lot of shows that just really, they're workmanlike, they're not. And I in my life, I would rather, instead of listen to another show from '93 when Garcia's asleep on stage, I'd rather check out the new Alice Coltrane re-release and listen to that, because so the story to me of the book is really about the music and how it changes, and not for the better. But I think that's part of the story. I mean, and every story has decay at the end, right?
Yeah. I find it interesting. I remember the Rolling Stone article is saying that, they peaked in 77. You say it's what, 71 to 78 or something?
Those are I mean, to me, everybody, I think you're allowed to have your sweet spot. To me, it's 71 to 75, 74. So that's really the jazzy period. And that's really the period. But I love 77 and some stuff. In fact, I was listening to some stuff from 78 last night. And the Dave's picks I did was 2 shows from 77. Because they're still writing songs that are great, too. I mean, ask a Deadhead what their favorite Bob Weir song post-1978 is. And they'll say, well, Throwing Stone, it's not the same. I'm not saying that you get old. Lots of good music produced, and I respect Bob Weir greatly. I think his solos.
But sorry to interrupt you, but Bob Weir had said, I caught a couple of quotes where he thought the Grateful Dead peaked in the 80s.
He speaks really highly of the spring of 1990, and I write about that because that was a resurgence. But I think it's a resurgence because Garcia was clean, he was happy, he was playing. But I mean, if you listen to the tapes, if you're not there, he's not playing as many. He's just not as interesting a guitar player. They're also using all the technology that's derived for that period. And one of the big things for me about the Dead is, like a jazz band, there's a lot of space in their music. There's a lot of room. And when you're playing for 60,000 people, it's got to be the big sound, and everything has to be. And they started using technology, the MIDI and all that stuff. Not to my taste. And that's why I think if you listen to Garcia's solo stuff, I think he's more engaged playing with David Grisman. Mandolin player. No, not man. What is he? Oh, this is terrible. Plays on Ripple. He plays on. Anyway, David Grisman. I think that's the more interesting stuff. And yeah, but I have so much respect for Bob Weir, but I just don't think that, for me personally, I just don't think that 1990 was. They weren't making great music. They were making good music, solid music. But for me, from 71 to 78, it's so good. It's not like any other music in the rock world. It's just not. I can see why people hate it. I get it. I have a friend, really close friend, and he hates the Grateful Dead. I think I might have changed his mind a little bit. And I said, Tim, I get it. They're a shitty rock band. They don't play the 4/4. That's not their priority. Oh, okay. They're not failing at what you want. They're not even doing that, right? So you can't blame them for you can't blame a fork for not doing a spoon's job. And he's like, oh, okay, well, okay, that's kind of deal. Because the incredible eclecticism of their influences. I mean, Dylan said when Garcia died, there's a lot of space between the Carter family and Ornette Coleman, and Jerry filled it all. And I think that's one of the things that's great about a Dead show. You get country, you get space, you get jazz, you get ballads, you get weirdness, you get what you don't know, because often they don't know. I think that was incredibly revelatory to me, that they didn't have a set list, that they made it up, especially during the good, like the really good years. You got a good set of headphones, and you list like a Dave's pick or a Dick's pick, and you're listening. It's the beginning of the set, and they're like, okay, we're gonna go from this to this to this. What? Okay, good luck. And again, in that world, the world that we know, when rock has become business, I think that's so refreshing. And I think that there has to be an element of the amateur in any kind of art you make. You're a professional because you don't want to have a job. You want to make art. That's great. But you can't forget we're doing this because the reason we did it in the beginning, it's fun. It should be exciting. And I think if it's exciting for the writer or the musician or the entertainer, then it's probably going to have a better chance of being exciting for the audience, right? This isn't like a contemporary deal. Let's go to a stadium and you entertain me and I'll buy a t-shirt. This is symbiotic. Like if we're, and I think that's one of the things that gets lost. You get this huge adoring fan base who's turned on by MTV and, you know, the backward baseball caps and the King Cans and Pool Party kind of deal, which is fine. But, you know, go see, I don't know, go see AC/DC or something, which is fine. I love that, but different experience. And I don't think it can happen in a football stadium the same way, you know.
Why did Jerry not speak to when the concerts got bigger and bigger? Why did he not speak to the audience that much?
That's interesting. Yeah, well, that goes back to what we were saying earlier. You know, listening to these shows. I mean, I thought I had listened, but it's like anything. If you want to know a subject, they say teach it. So if you want to know a subject, write the book. And I noticed, because I always heard, okay, Jerry's very quiet. Okay, they're not a showbiz band. They never did that stuff. Hey, Iowa, how you doing? But Garcia or Weir would introduce, you know, like I think it was the band, but he would say, okay, we're going to technical delay or something. Garcia's quite, not garrulous, but he's quite open early on. He talks a lot. Not a lot, but he talks a fair bit. He's a very funny, insightful guy. And I realized that he's talking to them because he can see them. He knows them. This is like 2,000 people on a Friday night in San Francisco. And we all, so he would say, you know, he would talk to them. And I think he said that at one point he was on LSD and they were playing for a pretty big place, like a hockey rink. And he said something, probably just like, you know, move back or something. And he said, I felt like Hitler. I felt like I have this power. All these people are all revved up. And if I said, you know what, we are, and he said, again, anti-Beatnik, you don't tell people what to do. You set some parameters. You don't hurt me, I don't hurt you. It was kind of an anarchist kind of ideal. And he said, that was it. So occasionally during his solo shows, you might hear, thanks a lot, we'll be back in a few minutes. That's it. And again, I think there's a great amount of integrity in that. Because I don't want to go and say, you know, have someone say, you know, how you doing, Toronto, or it's not. They tried not to be show business, but be in show business, which is that tension, that conflict again. Which again, if you're a writer or any artist, I think you need that kind of friction. It can't just be, you know, they say happiness writes white. You just can't have 50 amazing shows or something. There's something else. Life isn't that simple. It's not that black and white. And I think Garcia not talking later on was conspicuous of the sense that this is not, we're not in Marin County anymore. We're not playing. They also played a lot of college campuses early on because they couldn't play bigger places. And that was kind of a kinship. You know, we're kind of like each other and we're all here. And if we decide, this is interesting too, because when they start morphing into more of a country folk, playing those folk sets, people are coming to their show still to hear Dark Star and the other one. And you hear people from the audience like, play Dark Star, play that. And Garcia would say, just relax, man. We got you all night. You know, why don't you listen? You know, like this is where we're at. If you want to be here, great. If you don't, go home. You know, there's the Deep Purple's playing next week. Come then. But we're going to play what we're playing. Right now, it's a 45-minute acoustic set because we're just really into this right now. And again, I find that very endearing. You know, not so much what do the people want. Let's have a market research and decide what people want to hear. This is what we're interested in. If you like it, and it's okay if we have 2,000 people. Now, in 1985, it's not okay because everyone's got kids and mortgages and drug habits and dentist bills and divorces. And so I'm not saying anybody's sold out, but your priorities change when you change. And I really respect the fact that even though they might have failed setting up their own record labels, when they came back in 76, which I'm sure you know, instead of playing a 13,000 seat arena, they played 6 nights at the same place for 2,100, not same place, same town, 6 shows for 2,000 people instead of 1. Now, obviously, that doesn't make sense economically. Hit it, move on to the next gig. But they were concerned about the experience, not just for their audience, but for them. And if we're having a better time, then you'll have a better time, and it'll be good, and we can all grow old with dignity, but still have fun. Well, it wasn't too long before they were playing the hockey rinks, and because it just didn't make sense economically. And of course, now the world we're in now, you can't even. I mean, people like even Neil Young have a hard time making it work economically because it's just a different world, which I kind of find encouraging. I think there's this return to a smaller scale that might be the savior. I mean, rock and roll is dead. It's vaudeville now. It's old guys like us talking, but I think there are people. I've got a couple friends, Stag and Billings. They're a little duo that play around town. And I'm not a real big live music guy, but I've been I've been checking out their shows, and I really like the community element of it. There's just this
Yeah.
element that, you know, it's not about the big stage anymore or anything, because it's just not, it's not as nutritious, it's not as fulfilling as a bunch of people looking at each other and feeding off the energy of both. And, you know, so maybe the bigness of contemporary rock might be its salvation in a way, you know, playing smaller places, you know.
In '93, I talked to Bruce Hornsby for the first time. He had just released Spirit Trail, which had Jerry on it,
Yeah.
and we were talking about, he was starting to think about, you know, the different concerts, different songs played differently every night.
Right.
I hadn't
Right.
quite done it yet. Not on the scale that he does it now, where he takes requests from the audience, you know, and but he was obviously heavily influenced by his experience in that band.
Yeah, and you know, and a lot of people don't know this, but Hornsby played in like a Grateful Dead tribute cover band back when he was in university.
Yep.
So and I, again, that's what I was saying before. It's not so much, oh, I love Friend of the Devil or I love Truck. It's more an ethos. It's kind of a sense of, and I think when you read what Hornsby, I've never spoken to him, but when you read the things he said about his experience playing with the Dead, particularly toward the end, he left because it wasn't much fun anymore. In his own words, he said, "Here I am playing in front of 60,000 people. I'm dying on stage. There's no energy, and the crowd's going bananas." And you know, he didn't have to do that because he had a flourishing solo career or whatever. And I really respect the fact that he told it like it is, because he's an honorary, you know, he's a great guy, a great musician. And I think, in fact, my favorite music from the '90s includes him because of his acoustic piano. It kind of undercut all that technology that I think overburdened the band. But I love the fact that he has taken that into his subsequent career and maintained that kind of attitude, which I think is, well, like I say, it's closer to art than saying, okay, we're going to play the hits in front of the adoring masses and then you buy the T-shirt, you know, which can be fun, but I don't think it's art, which is fun. Art's not for everybody. But to me, saying, I don't know what's going to happen tonight. Oh, do I remember that song? Okay, we'll do that. Maybe it's not perfect. That's the other thing, too. It's like, you know, every one of these shows, the reason I say, like, the Grateful Dead show is like life is because every day has got its ups and downs. Forget about every year. Every day has its highs and lows. And a lot of the show I was listening to last night, I can look it up, but I forget. But it was from '78 in Iowa. It starts off really rough, really rough. Well, February in Iowa, you know. And then it takes off and it's transcendent. And you can't have the one without the other. I mean, the one is born of the other. And that's, again, antithetical to our culture. Like, do you like it? Is it great? Well, some of it is. Some of it's, there's too much coke going around. The drummers have doubled up the beats. The subtlety, jazziness is gone. But what has come is this ferocity in some of the playing. Like some of the truck-ins in '78 are not the same truck-ins from '71. Truck-in '71 is kind of like this truck. '78, there's a lot of power chords and there's a lot of anger. And I don't even know if Garcia and the band knew. But your music, your art knows more than you do. There's a certain amount of like, this is our lives, you know, playing in the Unidome. That's where they played, the Unidome. Can you imagine? The Unidome in Iowa in February. And I find that fascinating, seeing the changes, how the music, how some of the songs change, how they become, they're such good songs, they can take in, they can encapsulate change, they can reflect how the artist has changed, how the world has changed. You know, I don't know what you asked, but that was the answer.
Well, one more thing about Hornsby, I remember asking him the second time I talked to him, where he was really doing a lot of improvisation. He was playing every song differently. I said, he taught me something. I said, well, why don't more musicians do that? And he says, because they're not loose. I said, you mean they're not tight? He said, no, I mean, they're not loose.
Right.
He says, because they don't, you know, and he also went into Britney Spears' #1. And if you're a musician, as opposed to a sports person, if you're in the right sport, you're always going to be a millionaire, multimillionaire. Musician, you could be the best musician in the world and you can make jack shit, you know?
You really hit it on the nose. The looseness is tied up with listening.
Yes.
And what he said, and again, with the greatest respect, I think Garcia was one of his greatest, you know, musical influences. He said, these guys at the end weren't listening to each other, which to me is anathema to what I love about the Dead. It's not going out and playing Jack Straw. It's about, again, headphones on. And sometimes it's hilarious. You know how they famously segue from song to song. You can see Weir wants to do this song, and he'll introduce it. no, let's do this one instead. I mean, that's amateurish. To me, that's art. Or sometimes if they're, I'm sure you've seen that famous show, which is in the book, the fundraiser in August of '72 for the Kesey Creamery in Veneta, or Veneta, Oregon. And there's a great dark star, and there's actually some video surviving from it. So you should check it. It's called Sunshine Daydream, and it's a really deep dark star. I mean, it is full of space. They're clearly stoned. Whenever Lesh takes his glasses off, you know he's taking acid. So he's got it, and Jerry's playing like a god. It's great. And at one point, Weir stops, shakes his hand. He looks around. The sun's coming down. There's like a couple kids on the stage. It's just, and then he dives back into it. And then he says, "We got to go into El Paso. I just got to bring this back." And Jerry won't hear of it. Jerry is off in the cosmos. And then eventually he brings them back down to earth. Like, "Gary, we have to come back to earth." And that to me is goosebump time. I mean, that is like, and luckily, because of this technology, we have it forever. I can play it tonight. You can play it tonight. You can read about it in the book and go listen to it. And to me, that's the real stuff. But you have to listen to each other. And if you got a gig tonight, a gig tomorrow night, and off gig, and I got to call my wife, you're just going to play the tunes. You're going to get tight and play the tunes, which has its appeal. I'm sure seeing the Stones in '72 was amazing, but they played their tunes. I know people who saw that Exile tour, and it was amazing, but it was the tunes sounding like they did on the record, which is great. It's the Eagles show. Here's the tunes that you like, which is great. It's a different thing, though, to me.
Yeah. Well, the Eagles are as different from the Grateful Dead as you can get as far as every night's show. Yeah. And it's a disappointment to them if hey, man, your note was off on I remember I was reading a biography of Karen Carpenter, fascinating story, but her brother ran the band, and some guy, like, he didn't play like the right lick on Rainy Days and Mondays, and he got bawled out afterwards because people come to hear the songs like they did on the radio, which is fine. But to me, I love the messiness of the Dead at their peak. The sense that we don't really know what we're doing any more than you do. But if you're willing to come and hang out with us, maybe we can all get off. Or maybe it won't be a great night. And, but that riskiness, that danger, I think, I need that in my art, whether it be music or writing or whatever. I need that, I remember playing the In the Dark album, Touch of Grey, on the radio for the first time, getting some calls, and the lady called me and she says, "Oh, that's what the Grateful Dead sound like." Whoa, beep, beep, back up the truck, baby. No. I wish I had that story to put in my book, because that is it. There were a lot of people who said, "I saw the video, and apparently there's a lot of casual sex and a lot of drugs. Let's head down to the Unidome and check this out." Which, again, is fine, but if you talk to people who did go to the shows in the '70s, they said, "Wow, it changes. It can't help but change. It's just like population density. The drugs are different. It's not hallucinogenics and pot. It's alcohol and coke, and these make large groups of people act differently than they do." And Dennis McNally, who was the band's publicist, and he wrote a fine biography of the book. He talked about how he got turned on to the Dead. He was in graduate school back in the early '70s, and someone said, "Hey, have you heard this? Let me play it for you." Cool. Wow, I like it. Next week they're going to be in Rochester. Let's go down there. He talked about an ecosystem, and the ecosystem could not survive MTV and a hit song. I mean, everybody loved it because everybody got new cars and houses. Everybody got raised because the Dead were very generous. But he said the ecosystem was gone. It was over the airwaves and come to the show, get laid, get high. His most telling incident was, he said he used to have tickets. If this show didn't sell out, he would walk around the parking lot in the Shakedown Street. And he talks about how he saw a guy, and he's like, I'll miracle him, as they say. I'll give him a ticket. And he's like, "No, I don't need a ticket, man. I'm here for the party. He didn't want to go inside the stadium and see the show. He might miss something in the parking lot, right? So, yeah, it's different from, yeah. So why do you think that, it's a perfect, I mean, that was a number 9 song. That and it's a great song. It's a good song, yeah. It's a great pop, and also the lyrics are not your typical top 40 song. It's a song about a midlife crisis, and with that sort of defiant affirmation at the end. It's wonderful. I'm not crazy about the production, but it's the least offensive on those couple albums. But it's a great song. But I'm again, it fits in with the book in the sense that I think that flirtation. Everyone wants success, but how much success changes what happens? Like,
you want success to be happier, but maybe too much success doesn't make you happy. We all know about the self-medicated businessman or businesswoman who can't stop because they have too many mouths, like, and that's how Garcia felt too, because they employed their friends a lot, especially. And they gave him good health care. They gave him all that stuff. They have bonuses. If we don't tour this spring, because he was always the one saying, am I the only one that thinks these shows suck, these stadium shows? Yeah, but here's the numbers. All right. Okay, we'll go. So it's not the fault of the song. It's a great song. I think it's just that, again, the world changes. Television, media, now social media. Get it? There's something very organic about turning someone on, a person, and saying, hey, check this out. And I always find that too. I'm not any bestseller. Some of my best readers are people who have been, someone suggested, hey, I know you never heard of this guy. Check out his book. You haven't read about him because he's not in the New Yorker, but check this out. And it's always the most satisfying because it means someone, and it may not mean you can have, big house or whatever, but it does mean, I think, that your work's affected one person, which is what I always hope for. One person would like it. And then maybe that person would say to somebody, check this out, which doesn't.
One more thing about In the Dark, the Europe 72, double platinum, American Beauty, I think it was called, was it? Yeah. Double platinum. And then this album, In the Dark, goes double platinum. Those three records. And it's interesting. It's an interesting company because they're very different records, but
the world had changed too, right? I mean, the world had changed. It's hard. It's easy for people like me to forget. I was 6 years old in 1972, so I wasn't. But even when they were, we think, okay, they were a big rock band. They still weren't playing huge places. They were playing regularly 3, 4, 5. By 74, they're playing hockey rinks, but it's still sold on that kind of head level, where we're all like, you didn't hear about it on TV and go buy it. You didn't hear it on the radio. The Dead weren't even, unless you're in San Francisco or the cooler college stations, you weren't even heard on the radio, which you would think would be anathema success. You're not on the radio. You're not on this. Well, how was it done? It was like word of mouth kind of deal, And so when something like In the Dark happens, it's a different world. And it's a different world now because there wasn't social media then. And there's a lot about social media in my next book because I think it's a wonderful tool. Look what we're doing right now. But I think it's become kind of an end in of itself. And I think that's kind of scary. It's not a tool for communication anymore. It's sort of our reason for existing is to be online and check and get our dopamine boost and we get our likes and it's almost like an active social resistance. Not to, one of my proudest things in my life is I don't have a cell phone. My wife has one, so I cheat a bit, but I don't have a phone, which causes people to jaws to drop. But I just find that people that I know just spend so much time on their phones, not for work, but just as a default position. And I think that when you talk about In the Dark in '89, all it took was for you to be on your couch and see those pictures of all those beautiful girls and all those drugs and that catchy tune. And they're playing at the football stadium, plenty of good seats still available, which is, again, fine, but it's not my idea of a good time. And I don't think it was Garcia's or Lesh's, frankly. I think Weir liked it. I think Weir's such a good guy. He's very game. I think he enjoyed being a big. He wanted to be Fleetwood Mac. When they hired Keith Olsen to make Terrapin Station, he had just come off doing the first Fleetwood Mac album. He was like, this guy can get us on the radio. And if you listen to Weir's solo albums, they are kind of slick. They're not the first one, not Ace, but the ones from the 70s. They're an attempt to get on the radio. Or I think Garcia was surprised, I think, that they had a hit. They've been playing that song for 7 years. That song was debuted, I think, in 82. No, yeah, 82. So it wasn't like, let's write a hit tune. It just had, it's such a great tune, it's such a great tune. And Hunter, initially, I think, when he gave it to Garcia, it's kind of a downer tune, like a midlife. And then Garcia transforms in it because it's very cynical, it's very wry. But I always find it tremendously affirmative. And so, yeah, again, the messiness of a great song, but I think it was the beginning of the end of the Dead as a, as art.
What year, part two, you're taking someone, if you go back in time to a Grateful Dead concert, you're going to tell me, don't answer yet. What year would it be? And this person, he or she knows nothing about the Grateful Dead. How do you preface this concert? How do you prepare the person, or do you?
Well, yeah, that may be more relevant. I think it would be 73 or 74 when you had those huge shows. that box set that I just wrote the notes for, the Here Comes Sunshine box sets, all of those shows were around 4 hours. So, so you do get the whole, everything from short and fast to long and spacey. And I think I would say that. I say this isn't a concert so much as an experience. And I say, if you get lost, listen to Garcia's guitar. If you think, why the hell am I listening to Marty Robbins' El Paso? Which and yet, for the 10,000th time, Weir does Johnny Cash's Big River. But listen to Garcia's guitar. And that voice always keeps me centered, which would probably mean that person would say, no, thanks, I don't want to come with you because that sounds really freakish. But that's the way I feel. 73, 74, you got your 4-hour shows, you've got everything from country to space. And I think that the key is, and there's also that sense, don't be surprised if things change. If something's working, they'll keep doing it. If it doesn't, one of the shows that I write about, September of 73, and they're working on the Wake of the Flood record. And of course, your newest material is always most exciting to you, right? The new book or the new interview or whatever. And so they're into the other ones are usually 25 to 30 minutes during 73, 74. So they're about 7 or 8 minutes into it. Weir's song, they're down in the depths of the space and they're getting spacey. And then out of nowhere, Garcia hits those first notes of Eyes the World. Do, 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 do. And it goes from deep space to sunny, samba. Garcia didn't want to go there anymore. And that is thrilling to me, Can you imagine the Stones stopping during Satisfaction because Keith's bored with it? Let's play something else. I'll finish the song and then move on, right? It's just, and it's complete. You can tell the band has no idea because they're 7 minutes into a 25-minute song. No, don't feel that way right now. That's the kind of show I'd want someone to come to, as opposed to, boy, you're going to hear all their good tunes tonight.
Henry Gross, who was at Woodstock with Sha Na Na, had told me, he said he ran into Jerry. Oh, wow. And he says, I wasn't sure what planet he was on, but one thing's for sure, he was incredibly happy. He was just, he says,
my book's not a biography. There's plenty of good biographies out there. Blair Jackson's book, I think, is the best. Jerry Garcia, An American Life. There's a lot, but that is something that comes through in the book, and you can see that his idea of happy was, his wife would roll him 10 joints in the morning, as long as he had tang, coffee, and pot, and he was playing music. There's a couple points in there where I say, okay, I'm talking about these 3 Dead shows, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Well, Monday and Tuesday, he was playing at the bar downtown with Merle Sanders with his jazz funk band. And then the next week, he's playing with his bluegrass band over there. As long as he was playing music and living there. And it's a very idyllic period, I think, up to that point. But then we all become adults, and the world changes, too. The world is 1978 to 1960. And that's really interesting to me. How much are you controlled by your environment? How much can you say, well, I want to isolate myself? Or is that bad? Well, you're hiding from the world. Maybe hiding from the world's a good thing. I don't know. I like questions. And I think and I don't know if there's a lot of answers in this book or any of my books, but I think that one of the things we can do as artists or musicians or writers or whatever is to at least tease out the questions or tease out the incongruities, tease out the conflicts. Because I think, especially the way our mind works as human beings, exacerbated by social media, there is a tendency toward this or that. And I just don't find life that interesting, this or that. If I knew what a book was about before I started, I wouldn't write it. That would sound way too much like work, which I've tried to avoid my whole life. It's kind of exciting. I don't know where this is going to go, But when it's done, you think, oh, of course, it was supposed to be this way. You really get off on that. When you're done, it almost feels like, of course, it had to be this way. But of course, it didn't. You could have gone anywhere. It's the book insists, or the music insists, or, it's kind of like a jam. You start off, you introduce a theme, you play around with it, and you go somewhere. And as long as you have places to go, keep going. If you don't, let's circle back. There are some long, jammy stuff. It's just, they're just, Garcia's wanking or noodling. Yeah, there are some places. You just don't get it that night. Like every time you make love, it isn't always great, at least for me anyway. Well, can only speak for me, but sometimes it is. And it doesn't mean that you weren't into it or it just doesn't happen. And I think that, I don't know how I end up talking about sex life. Let's just change the topic then.
By the way, the How to Die book.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that book?
Yeah, that came out. Oh, perfect time. I had 2 books come out in 2020. Great time for books to come out during the pandemic. It was called, the subtitle is important. It's called How to Die, a book about being alive. And I've always been, in all my work, I've sort of circled around mortality. It's always been fascinating to me. Again, studying philosophy at U of T, that was sort of my, I didn't study writing. I came into writing when I was finishing my degree. And so I thought, okay, for once in a while, I'm just going to confront this in a non-fictional way. I'm going to work my way through death as it's been seen through the past, how it's seen now. And my argument really is that unless we treat death seriously, we're not going to have as interesting or as full or as exciting a life. It's very much the Nietzschean idea that the fragility of life, if you embrace it, will actually make life zestier and more. You won't put off till tomorrow because, yeah. And it kind of certainly back to the dead. They talk about Garcia. When did you become a musician? So I played music all the time, but he was in a car crash, and one of his best friends died, and he thought, now it's time to get serious because this. I didn't realize that, like, yeah, you're a kid. Nobody dies unless they want to, right? Just old people die. And his friend died, and he said, okay, it's time to get serious. And that's the guy who spends 7 hours a day practicing. And I think that's what How to Die, a book about being alive, really is about. It's not a real popular thing to talk about death or to think about mortality or think about the ones you love. But I think if we do, and as I try to do through the book, talk about it, I think coming through the other side, there's a reward. You know, I think there's a reward because you appreciate life more. You're more willing to go for it, so to speak. And I don't mean like career wise. I mean, today I'm going to go for a walk. Yesterday instead of playing on my phone, maybe next week I won't. And as I've gotten older, I've had friends die way too young. And there's nothing that's happened in subsequent years since that book's come out that made me think anything different. In the sense that I think unless we take death seriously, we're not really taking life seriously. It's not a downer book. It's not a book about, it's a book about, let's look at death, because if we do, what can we learn from it? Because it's there, What are you going to do? You can avoid it, which works up to a point until, you're a certain age. Gee, where'd my life go? Kind of deal. And I find that kind of sad. I find that really sad. And maybe, art can help us wake up. Really, because a lot of life is sleepwalking. It's necessary, right? But also, I think what it's about is being alive and being conscious of being alive and exploring and doing those things. And so that's what that book was about. But during a pandemic, people didn't want to hear about embracing death. They didn't want to.
They had enough of that.
The CBC especially, they're like, yeah, we're not talking about that. Get your booster shot. Well, we could, no. And initially, naively, I thought, this is great, man. I've hit the mother load here. This is great, but I had to wait 3 years to be working on a Dead book and then actually do stuff for the Grateful Dead. But anyway, hopefully it's one of those books that doesn't, it doesn't age, because I don't think, we've conquered the idea of death or anything. And there's a lot of thinkers and writers and musicians and stuff in the book who I evoke or quote, who have helped me through the years too. And I think that's important too, to sort of say, do you know this 5th century Greek poet who writes about, drinking too much wine and stumbling out in the yard, looking at the stars, taking a piss and going, who am I? Why are we here? And this is a guy who's 2,000 years ago. I think that we should have that. I think that's one of the things, literature. I come from a working class town. Neither of my parents were working class people who insisted upon education to, get a better job, which is great, But what I was lucky enough, because my dad was able to catch that last union job time in the mid 60s, automotive factory, where all of his friends, could make lower middle class money doing grunt labor, right? Which, gone now. The company eventually moves to Mexico and blah, blah, blah. But what I was so lucky or entitled or privileged to have was to actually see that there was this connection, that we're not isolated in 2023. We're connected to 1923 and 1823. And I like that. And I think that's one of my jobs, not in this book, the Dead book, but say in How to Die, or a book I wrote called Why Not? 15 Reasons to Live. After I had a depression, I wrote 15 essays about things that made life worth living. So yeah, I would quote, Lucretius or Howlin' Wolf or whoever, because I think that they're part of, I don't have an organized religion. I don't connect to this and that, but I feel like I'm a part of something bigger than me. And I think I'm part of humanity. And I think that very often we think that the history began the year we were born. Everything before that was for old black and white people. No, they were just as alive as we were, just as full of life and as sure of things. And I find that kind of exciting, kind of scary, because there's a reason that we simplify things, because life is too overwhelming. So putting them in the neat little boxes is, but it's not for me. I guess I I'm a pretty wingy guy, so I need a lot of stimulation. So that
Mhm.
that to me is very, very attractive. So that's kind of what How to Die. Long answer. That's what How to Die is.
Phil Lesh has died. He was 84. Lesh was a founding member of the classic band Grateful Dead and their bass player. When the group broke up in 95, Lesh continued playing music in his own band called Phil Lesh and Friends. He was born in Berkeley, California. His first instrument was the violin. Then came the trumpet. Then came jazz and avant-garde music. By 1961, he'd enrolled in the University of California in Berkeley. While working as a volunteer, he met Jerry Garcia. At that time, their musical interests were very opposite, but it's the friendship that kicked off everything. In the fall of 1964, he joined Garcia's band called the Warlocks. Interestingly, this was the first time that Lesh really played the bass seriously. It said many times that he had to learn on the job when it came to the bass guitar. At that time, his major influence was Jack Cassidy of the Jefferson Airplane. But on bass, he was a quick learner. He learned how to improvise, and this was San Francisco in the 60s, where improvisation was also encouraged. Some of the big songs he contributed to the Grateful Dead: New Potato Caboose, Box of Rain, Truckin', Unbroken Chain. And his tenor voice was a big part of the three-part harmony sections in some of the group's songs. That was him singing the high harmonies on songs like Ramble on Rose, Brown-Eyed Woman, Viola Lee Blues, and Truckin'. Looking back at Lesh with the Grateful Dead, he was one of the ingredients that made the band improvise more, giving them those great free-form space interludes. The announcement of his death came today, October 25th, in a statement posted to his official Instagram page. It simply said, "Phil Lesh, bassist and founding member of the Grateful Dead, passed peacefully this morning. He was surrounded by family and full of love. Phil brought immense joy to everyone around him and leaves behind a legacy of music and love. We request that you respect the Lesh family's privacy at this time." Another great has left the building. If you want to donate to the channel, there are links in the description. You can join our Patreon. You'll get early access to all our interviews. There's tons of stuff on there now that has not seen the light of day on YouTube yet. And we have a lot of swag with our logos on it. You can support the channel that way. Subscribe to our channel, share our videos, comment on them, and like them. I'm John Bowden. This is Rock History Music. Take care of yourself.